This conference will now be recorded.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Scott Overpeck from the National Weather Service in Albuquerque. We also have Daniel Porter with us, and we're going to go over a briefing for the fire weather coming up. We ask that you keep your lines muted as much as possible. I'm going to work on a real quick setting to make sure people are muted. Okay. So we'll get started with the briefing, and as you may be aware, we have issued a fire weather watch for the weekend Saturday, but there's going to be a prolonged period of high winds and also potentially historic fire weather conditions. And unfortunately, that's what we're going to be dealing with when we combine those high winds with the low relative humidity and also the just drought conditions that we have. So to start out, what are we going to be dealing with? Well, this is going to be a prolonged and, like we say, dangerous fire weather conditions for much of New Mexico. It's not just going to be one particular area. We are going to try and pinpoint a few different areas that we want to focus on. But again, we want to emphasize words really do matter, and we don't like to throw these words around too much because it does grab a lot of people's attentions. People are thinking we're overhyping. We don't think that's going to be the case here. And we're looking at several days where winds are going to be in that 30 to 50 mile per hour range with gusts getting up to 60, 70 miles per hour. And humidity is going to be an issue because it'll be below 10% at times during the day. At night, usually we like to see the relative humidity get up to like 70 or 80%. That's not going to happen. We'll be lucky to get to 30% at night in some cases, even 20% in a few areas. So those are very dry conditions, and it's just going to allow for any wildfires to continue to spread with the winds. Timing of all this, well, mainly it's going to be Sunday and Monday. We do highlight Saturday and Tuesday. The worst will be those 2 days, though. And that's kind of what we're looking at, is really trying to pinpoint exactly which day. It's going to be a kind of a combination of all these days. Saturday, it's going to kind of ramp up a little bit, but Sunday and Monday are probably going to be when the winds are going to be the strongest. And certainly in the afternoons each day. Tuesday, winds might not be quite as strong. And that's really also going to correlate well with when we think the fire weather conditions are going to be. Throw in the blowing dust, and then yes, it's going to be a messy weekend and early next week. Impacts, really kind of like we've seen how much damage we get, but I think the real danger is going to be the down trees, down power lines that could result, power outages. Hopefully those down power lines don't spark any fires. That's going to be the danger here. Rapid fire growth, extreme fire behaviors all on the table. We've got several fires, 4 big fires ongoing in the state. So that's really going to be the concern there. And then we got to watch for any new fire starts. And so hopefully we don't have any of those, but that's what we're going to be really trying to keep track of over the weekend and early next week. Some of our confidence, we're pretty confident. If we're doing a briefing this far out, we're issuing red flag warnings and that kind of thing 2 days in advance, 3 days in advance. We have pretty high confidence to do that. It's really going to be that Sunday, Monday time frame that's going to be the peak. Some of these winds aren't going to be quite as high as we've seen in some of the events we had in April, like April 22nd, April 29, April 12th. Those days come to mind. They're all pretty big days, a lot of impacts when we had most of our fire starts. And that's kind of the tricky thing, because we want people to know that those were just one day, and this could be 2 or 3 days, and that's kind of where we bring in this dangerous and historic kind of wording is because it's not any one day. It's going to be a stretch of 3 or 4 days here that we're really concerned about, not just one. And so we've seen a little bit of this in April, but not to this degree. And so that's really where the danger is coming in, is that it's not just going to be one day, it's going to be several days in a row. So looking at Saturday, these are the basically the headlines. We have the fire weather watch, which is going to be upgraded to a red flag warning for the majority of the area, if not all of the state. High wind gusts. So wind gust forecast for Saturday. Looking at gusts up in the 40, 50 mile per hour range in these yellows and oranges. Typical hot elevated areas that we're going to be concerned about. But you notice that most of the time we've been focused on like the southern areas, Rio Grande Valley, and then Santa Cristo Mountains, the highlands, northeast, eastern New Mexico. I want to point out that Gallup to Farmington could still see some pretty good wind gusts in this situation, and even through this event. So we haven't highlighted the western areas of New Mexico very much in the past in the April events, but this could be one of those situations where these areas will get some of the higher wind gusts across the state for this event. So we do want to point that out, that's certainly a possibility. It's not just going to be any one area, but there's going to be several areas that could be impacted by this. We mentioned the relative humidity, and what we're doing here on the left graphic is showing how many hours below 10% relative humidity. So these are not relative humidity levels. So you see these 14s at Fort Sumner, 9 at Klein's Corners, 10 at Vegas, Las Vegas, Cuba, Los Alamos, 6, 7 hours. So that's how many hours? So 6 or 7 hours all the way up to 14, 15 hours of having relative humidity below 10%. So that's part of the danger here, is in the afternoon, it's just going to be downright dry. And then you don't typically think of us briefing maximum relative humidity, but that's what we're doing here. Highest relative humidity for Saturday. You see some of these areas are only getting up into the low 30s. There's some 50s up in the mountains, but a lot of these areas are below 30%. And so we're just not getting that moisture, that recovery to help slow down any of the fires. So these are still very dry conditions, and any of the fires that we have going on in these areas are still going to keep going overnight, especially if we have any winds. The winds may not necessarily die off at night. Sometimes we get that at nighttime. The winds will go calm. That may not happen this weekend. So keep hold on to some of these winds, and then have the relative humidity is still going to be pretty low. We're going to have really that extended period of time where fire growth is going to happen. So that's where these critical fire weather conditions come in. We want to remind you about what these conditions are. We've been dealing with them this last month, but again, this is one of those situations where we're going to see all this come together, especially Sunday and Monday. Uh, Above normal temperatures. Don't normally think of that, but we're looking at a high of 90 degrees in Albuquerque on Saturday. We're looking at maybe near 100 in Roswell Saturday, Sunday. So temperatures are going to be up there. They're going to be warmer than what we have typically seen. And then we have the low humidity, the winds. It's all coming together. So with that, I'm actually going to hand it off to Daniel, and he's going to talk about wind speed probabilities, because what we want to do next is for Sunday and the next few days is provide that range of wind speeds, and this is kind of where these probabilities come in and are helpful.
All right, well, thanks, Scott, and good afternoon, everyone. What you're seeing here on the screen here is the outlook for Sunday, and this is one of our internal models called the National Blenda model. So basically, it looks at all the deterministic solutions as well as all the ensembles out there. So it is a plethora of models that it's looking at all at the same time, and it's putting everything into perspective with respect to probabilities. So on the left-hand side of the graphic here, I want to kind of put your focus in on the areas that are blue and green, which blue indicates where it's greater than 50 knots or 58 miles per hour, which is the point at which we start issuing severe thunderstorm warnings if we were in a more of a severe thunderstorm type of event. But that's when wind damage certainly can mention, as Scott highlighted earlier. And then in those green shaded areas is where we're talking potentially 70 miles per hour or even higher. So on the left-hand side is the most likely scenario. So about 50% of the members are above it and 50 are below it. So this is what we are expecting at this point in time based on the latest model guidance here. And I will mention there in the Jemez Mountains too, there is a bit of an artifact of some lower wind speeds. That's not really a real feature there, that we can probably just ignore that. The winds will certainly definitely be strong there in the Jemez Mountains as well. So you can see large areas of the forecast area here, particularly across the higher terrain, and especially the Chusca Mountains up into the northern mountains of New Mexico, where we have the potential for some damaging wind gusts across that area. On the right-hand side, this is a reasonable worst case scenario based on the same model guidance here. And you can see greater probability or greater coverage potentially of areas that could potentially be exceeding 50 to 60 knots across the area. And what we're trying to highlight here as well is it's a very large, vast area of our area, northern 2/3 of New Mexico, that will be impacted by these strong winds. And what we'll say too is that the Sunday timeframe at this point in time looks like is where we're going to have the strongest winds across our area. But as Scott mentioned earlier in the briefing too, is these winds are going to persist during the overnight hours as well, and this will be a very prolonged event. That's what makes this particular event rather unique. So if we go on to the next slide here, Scott showed you these graphics for the Saturday time frame, but on the left-hand side is the number of hours that we do anticipate single-digit relative humidities. And you see several hours across the central portions and the eastern portions of the state. It's pretty impressive to see 15 hours of the day will be below 10%. And then on the right-hand side is those overnight relative humidity recoveries, and you can see they're very poor across the region, particularly across the eastern portions of the state, where some areas will struggle to even hit 25% for the maximum relative humidity. And to put this also into a little bit of perspective as well, is when we're looking at issuing red flag warnings, 15% is the criteria that we look at during afternoon hours is typically when these red flag conditions do occur. And you normally kind of see those worst conditions during the afternoon, early evening hours. We're going to be seeing below 15% for several hours of the day and going into the overnight hours. And as Scott had alluded to, that will allow fires to continue to grow and move through the areas. So if we go on to the next slide here, this is for the Monday timeframe. You still see the wind speeds still elevated across the air. Maybe not as strong as as Sunday, but we do anticipate potential damaging wind gusts across the higher terrain, particularly across the northern mountains of New Mexico. That's the graphic on the left, and on the right-hand side is kind of your reasonable worst-case scenario. So they could also extend out into the northeastern plains of New Mexico as well, where we could see those damaging wind gusts. And the other impact that will come along with this, with these strong winds as well, it will be the threat for blowing dust across the areas that will reduce visibilities and create hazardous travel conditions. If we go to the next slide, I'm going to sound a little bit of a broken record here, but for the Monday timeframe, the number of hours below 10%, we're talking generally 5 to 10 hours of the day. So maybe not necessarily as extreme as Sunday, but certainly definitely notable enough that we'll most likely will continue to be having red flag warnings across the area. And you see very poor relative humidity recoveries. Some areas will struggle to even get to 20% during this time frame. And then our last set of graphics will certainly be on the Tuesday timeframe. The winds do come down just a smidgen for that Tuesday timeframe. The graphic on the left, that most likely scenario, but we still will anticipate wind gusts pushing 35 to maybe as high as 55 miles per hour based on our latest model guidance. And on the right-hand side is your reasonable worst case scenario, showing, again, the northern high terrain where all those fires are going on right now, out into maybe even the northeast plains of New Mexico. We can't discount even down in the Gila and the Chusca Mountains as well. Those areas are certainly going to be susceptible to very strong winds. And then on our final slide here, for the Tuesday timeframe, we're looking at single-digit relative humidities, again, 5 to 10 hours worth. On the right-hand graphic, you do see very poor relative humidity recoveries across western and central New Mexico. You do see some improvement during that Tuesday night time frame across the eastern plains of New Mexico. There is some model guidance that suggests there could be some moisture return across the eastern plains of New Mexico, but that does come with low confidence as the models have been trending back on that solution a little bit during that time frame. So we'll have to keep an eye on that, but any moisture return is going to be mainly focused across the far eastern plains of New Mexico and particularly into parts of Oklahoma and Texas. It will most likely not, at least for the Tuesday, Wednesday timeframe, make its way into central and western New Mexico. So with that, I will pass it back over to Scott.
Okay, thank you, Daniel. Yes, this is our main overview slide. You see green going to yellow tomorrow, and then transitioning to that red. So, I think we kind of gave you a pretty good rundown of what the wind speed's going to like. We talked about the humidity. The other component of all this is the fuels and the drought conditions that play a role in it. Well, that's there. I don't think there's a whole lot more we can really show there. But the idea here is that at least starting Saturday um, and going into the early part of the week, Sunday, Monday, we're really concerned about the fire weather conditions and with the winds. I think that's kind of going to continue to be the driver for our fire weather conditions, since just about everything else is pretty well in place for the next several days. So hopefully, tomorrow, there's still some concern. The wind's going to be a little bit higher than they've been today, um, but it's just going to continue to increase from there. And I think that's kind of the thing here is that by we get in the weekend and early next week, we're really going to see those winds crank up. Last thing I want to point out is that we've done this, and this is mainly for the emergency management community. Just a reminder, if you do get a fire or one of our current wildfires starts to threaten structures and there's immediate evacuations and the need to alert people, we can do a fire warning. It is a civil emergency message. We do this on your behalf. This is not something that we do for us. It's something that we want to coordinate with. We know that we have some incident meteorologists on site at all the current fires at the Bear Trap Fire, at the Cerro Pilado Fire, Cook's Peak Fire, which seems to be winding down a little bit, and then the Hermit's Peak Calf Canyon Fire. So if there's somebody there, that's an incident meteorologist that we are going to be in contact with as well. But if there's a new fire start that is going to threaten structures that we don't have anybody on site with, that's where we can coordinate, and we want to help you be able to get that word out. You can see in the message on the right, this is one that we did for Hermit's Peak and the Calf Canyon Fire, highlighting where the fire is, where it's threatening areas and the evacuations, and then basically where there can be shelters and people can go. So I think with that, we can certainly entertain any questions that you might have, and we will also get the recording out